On today's episode of Beauty Behind the Brand, we interview the co-founders of 3Ships, Connie and Laura. We dive deep into company culture, how to find the correct retailers to wholesale your products, as well as funding your business, whether that's through fundraising, through family and friends, or investors. Now let's dive into this episode because this is a key one for creating the correct business model when moving and scaling your business. Amazing. So happy to have you both on today's episode. It's always fun to have both co-founders on when doing interviews because we get to hear the best of both worlds on the side of the business, as well as you both collab together to create a beautiful business. So 3Ships, Laura, I have personally met you in person, which was amazing during the forum group that was way back in that was like 2019, 2020, I think it was. So I'm excited to actually meet you as well, Connie. I know we're not in person, but this is as close as we can get today. But I heard your episode on She's Interesting as well. And just the creating a business, creating a culture. You both have scaled this business like so well and so fast, but also very like consciously, and creating really great retail collaborations and really like showcasing those retailers that you're also working with. And from an outsider, from looking in on your social media pages, I can really see that they all come together and you're cheering all of them on, which is so amazing for brands, and your marketing, everything just seems outstanding. And you can really tell the culture of the business, and everyone seems to really enjoy what they're doing working for 3Ships. Now, talking about culture and the business, how many team members do you currently have at 3Ships?
We have 17, including our 2 warehouse staff, or 15 like working corporate at 3Ships, which is so crazy. And I think we have another 1 or 2 joining in the next 2 weeks.
Amazing. And now
Yeah,
do you
so it's
usually
come a long
hire,
way.
yeah, do you usually hire within Toronto, or can anyone work from anywhere?
Anyone can apply for the role. And most of our team is actually based in Toronto, but we do have a team member in the US. But we do keep things open. So if anyone's interested, you can always check out our LinkedIn.
Amazing. Oh, it'd be a dream job for someone, I'm sure. And then with creating and building a team, what are some of the like things you really look for as like founders? Do you find there's like certain like personality traits? I'm actually currently reading the book about like the 5 love languages of
Oh,
appreciation
nice.
in the workplace, which is always like it really makes you think about all the different things that you look for in different, like whether that's your romantic relationship or within like work relationship. Is there any key points that when you are hiring of people to match the culture of the business?
I think one thing that we definitely look for is someone that's been through something hard. That's always a question that I ask in my interviews, at least. I want to see that they've been through a challenge of some kind in their life. And I find that this leads to them being a better employee, especially at a startup company. There's going to be a lot of hard situations. I don't want the hardest thing that they've ever been through to be working for us. So that's something that's really important, is to have a life of perspective. Another thing that we always look for is our 4 values. So we have 4 key values that we hire and fire by. These are compassion, curiosity, hustle, and integrity. So we'll always look for those different elements within the interview by asking various different questions. So, for example, curiosity, a question that we can ask that would show if they have that or not would be, tell me about the last book that you listened to or podcast. And if it takes them a while to come up with that, then it probably shows that they're not very curious. Um, so we're constantly looking for different values within the people that we hire. We've actually found that hiring for more of a value-based system rather than skills is more successful.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. The value part is so critical, and I think not enough companies A, know their values, and B, hire and fire based off of their values. Another thing that we look for is making sure that their skill set is aligned with what we need for the business. Like something, and a way that Laura and I really love to share learnings is by talking about our mistakes. And I think a mistake that I've made in the past is hiring too senior for a role that doesn't require that level of seniority yet, or if our company is not the scale where we need, like, let's just say COO level hire, like we shouldn't necessarily be interviewing that level yet. So that's something I'd recommend for your listeners. If they do have a company they're looking to hire new employees, just think about the scale and what your needs are for the next few years and not too much farther out. And then when it comes to reference checks, I think that's another thing that not enough founders or leaders think about. So one of the questions that we ask is, what would your previous manager rate you on a scale of 1 to 10? And what would they say that your biggest strength is? And what would you say they think your biggest weakness was? And then we would get the manager's info and ask them the same questions, just to see if they're aligned in their answers. And also asking, instead of saying like, what do you think they really suck at? Because a lot of references don't really share that transparently. A different way of saying it is, if we were to hire this person, how could I best support them? So then it's more positive, but then you're still able to get the information of like, okay, well, from my past experience working with them, they really struggle with prioritization, or they would work themselves until they were burnt out. And so these are different ways that you can get the same information, but by asking a frame of mind where they don't feel like they're throwing someone under the bus. So those are more like tactical little tips.
Oh, I love all those. I'm going to put, next time I do interviews, I'm going to be using these tips. And I love the value.
Laura and I have read a lot of books on like interviewing and HR and scaling. So highly recommend. There's a great book called Scaling People. And yeah, recommend to any founder.
Amazing. I love that, because I feel like that's the other thing is like, yes, as a founder, and especially like in startup stages or really any business, you're always going to be almost like an HR person, because you're managing people. You're managing whether that's your retailers, your actual staff, manufacturing, so many different parts of it. But I think if you have those key values, that's what I even think of with our team. That's something we need to work more on, is really getting, if I ask my team, like, what are our true values, really making sure that they can answer that clearly and know reasons why. Like, I love that you had a follow up to like, why curiosity, for example, or you're like, this is why we need this, because it's like, they're curious, they want to keep learning. And that's a whole part of being part, especially a startup, is you have to be willing and able to pivot and move where need be, and know
Really
those
flexible.
things.
Find your own answers, come up with your own solutions. I think someone that's really independent is what we look for as well. Because we have such a small team and everyone is truly the expert in their domain, like it's not like we have like 10 people within customer service, we have one person. So she has to be really efficient and to really take ownership over her channel, as an example. So those are personality traits that you either have, I think, or you don't have the ability to work independently and have confidence. So another element that I would recommend that you look for when you're hiring and building out your team is to make sure that you're hiring to fill gaps where your team might currently be weak in. So for example, our team right now historically has been very quiet. They aren't very outspoken. They're great at coming up with creative solutions on their own, but they're not very extroverted. And so a priority for us over our last couple of hires is to find people that are more extroverted, that are more vocal in their opinions, so that we can start to spur conversation and debate within the company. So that's an element that, like, even though it's not about the individual or their individual role, you have to look at the organization and step back and be like, what skills or traits are we missing from an organizational level as well?
And as part of our interview process, between interview 2 and 3, we have candidates complete, it's a free personality assessment online, actually created by Red Bull. Hilarious. Like, it's very random, but it's an amazing personality skill assessment. It's called Wing Finder. It's actually recommended to Laura and me by one of our business coaches. And they send their profile, strengths and weaknesses to us and our, like, the hiring manager in advance of their 3rd round. And so we can see, like, okay, if our team, like Laura was saying, is all really skilled in one domain, but we're really lacking in one other area, and then we see that a potential hire is really strong in that area, then we take that into serious consideration. So would recommend that as well. It's a great tool.
If you're wanting to try 3 ships, this is the opportunity. Save 20% off until August 31st with our promo code Beauty Brand Podcast. If you're wanting clean beauty, female founded, as well as great quality products, this is your sign to go purchase now. Don't forget to use 20% off with our discount code Beauty Brand Podcast, valid until August 31st. Happy shopping. That's a great resource. We can put that in the show notes below too for people because yeah, resources, especially even having someone like listening. That's why I love podcasts. Like number one, they're free. I feel like I never listen to music anymore. I'm always listening to a podcast, but because I am like curious. I want to listen, I want to learn. And those are great key takeaways. You touched on having a business mentor as well. Can you just kind of, because I had one as well that I'm just kind of in transition with, can you just explain how important it is to have mentorship through entrepreneurship? Because I feel like that's definitely something that people need to hear more of. Like it can be lonely. It can be like you each have each other as co-founders, but it's nice to have someone to kind of bounce ideas off and really have trust that they're rooting for you as well through that mentorship.
Oh, it's so critical. Connie and I always talk volumes about our mentors and how instrumental they've been in building of Three Ships. I think especially for you as a solo founder, anyone who's listening that's a solo founder, you need mentors. Connie and I are very lucky to have each other, but oftentimes mentors will help you step back and see things like for broadly how they are instead of being so focused on what you're currently doing, which is very easy to get wrapped up in as a founder or business owner. Like you're focused on today or this week without looking at the month or the year. And that's where mentors really shine, is helping you to step back. They also have so much experience within building and scaling teams that they'll probably know a hurdle that you're going to face in 6 months and give you the skills or ask you the questions to help you prepare for when that eventually becomes something that is an emergency and a fire that you have to put out. So we've had different mentors at different stages of the company. I would recommend having mentors that come and go with the business. It's fine that if you cycle somebody in and out, that's only natural. So with the current mentors that we have right now that we meet with on a regular basis, one of them is the past CEO of L'Oreal Canada, and then also ran L'Oreal in like Argentina, Germany, and then was executive vice president global too. Um, Very random story of how we met him. My dad was at some sort of like small little resort thing in Indonesia, and this guy was also there. They were swimming in the pool at the same time, and they just struck up a conversation. So you never know how people are going to come across your path. Another one of our mentors that we meet with on a regular basis who coaches us more on like the team building, organizational behavior, reporting, efficiency side of our business and like our own self-development as well. He's actually a tech founder. He's sold a couple companies within the tech space and now sits on the board of several different companies. And we met him through an accelerator program. So wherever you can find them, apply for these accelerator programs. They'll give you mentors through them. There was actually an accelerator, one of the first, I think the first one that we participated in, which was through Bumble Biz, and they did a collaboration with a female co-working space out of downtown Toronto, and it gave us free office space for a year as well as our original 3 set of mentors. And we don't use those mentors anymore because we've kind of outgrown them, but it gives you the initial skills of knowing what it's like to even be a mentee. So throw your hat in the ring when it comes to these accelerators. Even if it doesn't seem like you're the exact fit, find ways to spin your business so that you could qualify for that program.
Yeah, I feel like with the program that we met in, there was a mentor program as well.
Yeah.
And that's where it also really shows you where like that needle pushing activity, right? And it keeps you accountable. That's what I loved about having a mentor is like, such as a solo, I'm like not really, I'm accountable for people, but it almost made me push harder because I felt like I had to prove myself and like really show that like I can hit these goals and to grow. And that's what I loved in 6 months of having a mentor. I was like, I've done more in 6 months than I have in 2 years. Like it really made me
Amazing.
push and know I was on the right path.
Yeah, yeah, it's good to have that accountability person, but somebody that has the perspective of what it's actually like to run a business.
Absolutely. That's what I have a hard time about sometimes is this mentor culture in a sense of people wanting to be mentors. But I'm like, what have you done? Right? Like, what are the things that you've accomplished,
Yeah,
like actually done to then give me advice? Because as someone like I own a spa, it's like if I had a mentor who's never ran staff or had clients or responsibility in that sense, it wouldn't really work. So really do your research when looking for mentors, and make sure that they have even like references. See and ask other people that have also worked with them as well. hiring a mentor, because they're part of your team as much as an employee, because they're the one helping grow and scale that business as well. Now, when looking for retailers, we're kind of touching on very different points throughout today's episode, but there's so many things I want to learn and show our audience from both of you today. But with retailers, what is the best advice you had when really finding the correct kind of collaboration when looking for retailers, whether that's like online or in-person sales? Is there like a system that you go through, like kind of hiring employees, but you're like hiring to work with retailers? Is there a specific like equation that you do when doing this?
Sorry, just to confirm, so you're asking about finding the right retailers, but then also hiring people
So
for?
sorry, it's kind of like, yeah, finding the right retailers, but in a sense of like kind of what we were talking about with employees, like how you're almost like putting in them through an interview, like as if you're kind of hiring
Oh,
with them. Yeah.
got it, got it. Yeah, I mean, again, learn from a lot of mistakes on the retail front too. Something that we did in the past when we weren't too sure of our brand yet, back in the early days, is we were like, okay, we're an affordable skincare brand, but we're also natural, and like affordable is really subjective, but overall our price point's really great. So back then I was like, well, retailers like Target, where people go in and discover new brands and, you know, they're all about affordability, that might be a good large retailer for us to get into to you know, get our brand visible across all of the US. And that was a really great learning / mistake that we had to go through to realize like that's not the right distribution strategy for us, because really quickly we learned, while we do have an accessible price point, especially within the natural beauty industry, comparing our $30 serum to like a $10 CeraVe thing is just like not gonna cut it for us or for our customers, especially when we were a newer brand and someone going to Target had no idea who Three Ships was.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an expensive but quick mistake that we learned, pulled out after a few months. And ever since then, we've been really laser focused on our distribution strategy, which is being the affordable entry level brand within more upmarket retail like masstige and prestige. So for your listeners, get really clear about where you fit within that range. Are you more mass? Are you more prestige? Or are you in the middle like us, masstige? And then start to look at retailers within that sector. Something that's really helpful too is looking at your competitors that are within the same category, and also competitors that are in different categories. So for example, like for us, we're in skin, but looking at other masstige hair care brands, you know, wellness brands, like supplement brands, color cosmetic brands, and then looking at which retailers they're carried in. So that's something to look at, because you don't only want to look at what brands in your exact category are doing. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to differentiate. So that's something that we did, and it was a learning that we made really early on. And then when it comes to thinking about like the scale of retailer too, that's another learning that your listeners can be aware of, is you have to think about where you are on the brand awareness curve. And this was something one of our mentors in the past had told us, which made so much sense. So when you're early on in your product journey, not that many customers know about you. And then the awareness starts to like increase. And then you get to a certain point where like a lot of people or most people know about you. And the mistake that a lot of brands make is they start to pitch to these massive retailers, like let's just say a Sephora in the beauty world, when they're like a year into starting the business and you don't have enough awareness to bring your customers into that retailer to get the product off the shelf. And you can't rely on these retailers to do that for you. Like a lot of people think, oh, once you're in Sephora, their customers are just gonna be like, oh my God, well, like this product's on the shelf, I'm just gonna buy it. And what we are really, really careful with is knowing that there's one shot at a first impression and not pitching these massive dream retailers too early. So that's another part of our strategy that I'd highly recommend for your listeners, is thinking, yeah, okay, you can have these dream retailers on your list of ones that you want to get into in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and then start working backwards. Okay, if you want to get into Sephora, what are some of the retailers that they're looking at that are smaller that you can get into and that you can excel at? So for us, those are retailers like Credo Beauty, which was started by former Sephora execs, or the Detox Market. We know that Sephora buyers and Ulta buyers look at those retailers. Prove success there, get the unit sell-through numbers, and then use that when you're pitching the larger retailers. So a lot of tips there, but I just think that overall brands will, or founders, pitch retailers that are large a little too early sometimes, which can lead to like unfortunately, a lot of RTVs are return to vendor, which is when they make you pay for all your inventory back.
Mm.
And then it's just so costly, both from like a resource and also time perspective.
Oh, and even to have the product on the shelves, like people don't realize that. Like if you're looking at Shoppers, for example, they charge you for shelf space. If
Yeah.
your product's not moving, that's also a huge loss in your business. And I love that. Like we're in the middle of right now, kind of doing exactly that in the sense of we're doing a lot of we're starting doing retail sales but through shopping networks and channels on TV, whether that's like city TV, where like we're starting to do all of these type of things to then create more awareness right to the consumer as well, and like social media. But then hopefully then we'll kind of get the traction of even some subscription boxes, different things like that, that will hopefully get kind of our eyes on the product, because we're still such a small brand. But I think once people like your brand, once people try it, they're the referral program, right? They're the ones telling everyone, sharing, you got to try
Yeah,
this.
word of mouth is really the best.
Yes, exactly. And that's something that I find with exactly what you said. It's good to scale, it's good to grow, but there isn't always a perfect time to do it, but really do your research and like you said,
Yeah.
connecting the dots.
And like when you commit to a retailer, then commit. Like,
Hmm.
I think the last thing I'll say on this is that people think that the hard part is getting your product on the shelf. That's not the hard part. The hard part is getting it off the shelf. And after you sign on a retail partnership, or when you're going through the negotiation process, you should be asking them, like, what marketing co-op opportunities are there that are paid and unpaid? How can you support the launch, like from both the brand and also the retailer? Like, are you going to do a collaborative Instagram post and giveaway? Are you going to both have email newsletters go out about the partnership? Do they have an influencer program that you can be a part of? How often are they training their employees if they're a physical brick and mortar? And if so, can we provide gratis and retention quizzes to test their knowledge? Like there's what are their sampling opportunities look like? So there's a lot of this. And like a story I can share about just, really committing to retailers is one of our retail partners is the Detox Market, and we love working with them. And that was a really hard one to get into. And it required me going into their flagship and telling them, like, let me just do a pop-up for a day and prove to you that our products would sell at the Detox Market. And not a lot of founders are willing to do this. So I went during the holiday season, put up a table in the front, and we were their number one selling brand all day in unit and dollar sales. And after that first day, I showed the buyer the sales data. I'm like it's kind of the proof is in the pudding. And from there, now like they're a huge part of our marketing strategy. We're always supporting them, and we were able to land a new partnership through the Detox Market. One of the buyers for our large retailer was walking through the Detox Market in LA, and he was talking to their team, and he was like, what are some brands that I should know about? And they ended up talking about 3Ships for the longest time. And he reached out to me and was like, okay, the store team at the Detox Market was just raving about you. I need to get on a call with you. So again, like your reputation is everything. Going back to what you're saying, word of mouth is so important, not even just from like a D2C customer perspective, but even from retail, like buyers talk, store associates talk. Like, so you just want to make sure, again, you're picking the right retailers, but when you do, fully commit.
Oh, I loved all of that. Laura, do you have any notes on that as well?
I mean, Connie's our retail queen, so she's the one that runs our sales channel. I would just really emphasize the point that she made about the hard part being getting the product off the shelf,
Mhm.
and that the work doesn't stop when you get into the retailer. That's really when it starts. And it needs to be a full team effort. So get your marketing activations, get your influencer spend behind supporting those specific retail doors. Call out your retailers within your email flows so that customers know where to find you, create social content around shopping in store. It should really be a full business effort um, to get products moving off of those shelves if you want to take wholesale really seriously.
Yeah, it's a whole other beast, isn't it? Like
It
from
is.
retail to wholesale. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And oh, sorry.
no,
I was
you
just
go
gonna say,
ahead, Connie.
going back to the team topic that we were all talking about earlier, when we brought in our director of marketing, that really changed the way that we talked about our retail partnerships, because in the past, marketing was almost synonymous with our online channel and supported mostly ecom. And when she joined, we had a really serious like strategic conversation around like how is marketing going to support both ecom and wholesale. So now in all of our marketing, like calendars and all of our marketing postmortems, there's a separate section for retail. And that way the marketing team has visibility into all things wholesale. And we're making sure that they're a priority in what we're voicing each month. So
Mhm.
yeah, just again, thinking about hires, you need to think about hiring people who think holistically, and aren't just funneled in one area.
Now, do you have like, because if you're like promoting one specific, let's say detox market, for example, do the other retailers sometimes get like, would they have to then pay a certain amount, let's say, to get put on your pages, or is there a certain like kind of relationship you have to try to keep them all happy with all the retailers you have?
Yeah,
Um,
so
oh no,
from a
I was
re
just
from a retail perspective, one thing that we do when we sign on every retailer is we ask them, what are the most successful channels for us to work with you? So it depends on each retailer. Like, for example, well.ca, which is another great retailer in Canada that we work with, they really like when we do Instagram story takeovers. Versus with the detox market, they don't have as much flexibility there. So that's like a natural win for us. We're like, okay, well, if I'm able to record a quarterly Insta story and have it posted on well.ca, that makes them happy. And then with the detox market, we do more like email marketing. That being said, we have had to navigate conversations with certain retailers where they saw that we really supported a certain retailer in one aspect, and they're like, oh, it'd be really nice if we got that. For example, product exclusives. We have certain agreements with some retailers where if they carry a new launch that's like a really buzzy launch for us, they get a 1 month exclusive in that territory with us. And I've had retailers reach out being like, oh, like, can we get an exclusive for the next launch? And you have to manage those conversations because sometimes they're just way too small, unfortunately. But it's, I think, as long as, and I think Laura and I really do a great job of this, as long as you're always leading with kindness and with integrity, I really don't think that you can really piss off retailers that much because they know you're coming from a good place. They know you're trying your best. I think where the waters get murky is if they don't trust you.
Mhm.
And that's when you start to have this problem of them being like, hey, like, you're not doing a good enough job. Like, we need this from you. So again, always lead with kindness is something that Laura and I really strive for.
Did you have anything as well, Laura, to add to that?
Oh, I was gonna say that the point you made of do retailers pay to be on a certain position on your pages is a really smart way to think about it. I don't think we've ever considered something like that before. It'd be, I think, difficult to get retailers to pay to be featured on the specific channels. But that's a really cool idea.
I'm just like, how does it work? That was my idea. I was like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like influencer sponsorship, but like
Yeah.
through your social channels. I don't know. I was just kind of throwing out some of the things that obviously we do with influencers or different. We do that with some of our pop-ups for our spa locations. Sometimes we'll do like little incentives that way. But it's always interesting to me of like learning the different ways like that the back end of things work. Like as a consumer, as people listening to the podcast, it's so interesting to know how all the kind of analytical things work behind the scenes. And I know you were like Indigo was one of the larger retailers. Was that one of your first large retailers you were in?
I think so.
Yeah. And that's like, I feel like that's such a, well, especially in Canada here too. I feel like we're so different than Canada and the US and some of our big box stores like Ulta and especially beauty. But where was your mind at when you finally got into like your first big one? What was like, were you like nervous, kind of overwhelmed? Did you feel like really like kind of like, oh, we did it, like excited right away? And or like what was kind of the feelings of you as individuals as well as the team?
I mean, I think our first big one was honestly Target, which was,
Target.
like
Yeah.
Connie mentioned, a big mistake. I think for Target, I was feeling really overwhelmed. I was feeling like, oh my gosh, this is massive. The amount of inventory that they were buying up front, the forecast that they were providing, just the logistical back end challenges of what it actually looked like to fulfill to them from our 3PL in the US. It was pretty nerve-wracking, but it was also very exciting. For the Canadian retailers, though, I think that those were much more they hit close to home because, like, Indigo,
Mhm.
for example, when Connie and I first met and I'd offered her to join me as my co-founder, one of the next things that we did was we went to the Eaton Center and we walked around and looked at the retail assortment at some of these retailers that we're now in, including Indigo. And I think I still have pictures on my phone of what their assortment looked like back then. And we were just, so that was a full circle moment when we launched at Indigo and finally got to see our products on shelf there. That was probably the retailer that I still feel the most happy and proud that we landed, because it's a retailer that holds such a dear spot in my heart personally as like a consumer.
Hey there, beauty entrepreneurs and self-care enthusiasts. Are you looking to enhance your beauty business with a top-tier lash serum or simply seeking to elevate your own beauty routine? Look no further than Muskoka Beauty Lash and Brow Enhancing Serum. Proudly made in Canada, our serum offers the perfect blend of nourishing ingredients to naturally enhance your lashes and define those gorgeous brows. Whether you're aiming to retail a sought-after product or enhancing your personal beauty, Muskoka Beauty has you covered. And here's an exclusive offer just for our podcast listeners. Enjoy a fantastic 15% off discount on your order. Simply use the promo code podcast15 when visiting muskoka.com to claim your savings. Again, that's promo code podcast15 for 15% off our lash and brow serum. By the way, it is our best sellers, so can't wait to see your before and afters.
Yeah, very much like same like thoughts as Laura. I think with Target, I was just really scared. And you know how people say like when you meet the right, like let's just say partner, you don't feel as many butterflies and it's more just like excitement and it feels right. I think that's something that we've had to learn also with retail. Like when we signed on with the detox market or with like Halt Run Through, it just felt like secure and like confident. And obviously there's a lot of work to do and nerves around it, but it was mostly like, okay, we got this, like we're really excited. And that's something maybe when your listeners are pitching retailers, like tune into how you feel in your body. Like, does this feel like the right move for you? And obviously you're going to make mistakes along the way, but as you have more and more years of experience, your intuition is something that you shouldn't ignore because it comes from experience. And I think now when it comes to, now we have a salesperson on our team who's pitching new retailers, and when he is sharing with me the retailers on the list, like it's very clear we're like, okay, like this one feels right versus this one like we're not so sure about. And we have our broker even pitching retailers to us, and now my salesperson has to approve or deny those retailers that they're pitching to us. And it's like, if you're not clear, and like, you know, again, trusting your intuition, it can be really tricky. But yeah, I think like with Indigo, like Laura said, that was a big one. It was like my childhood second home. So it's really cool to see our products there.
I love that. And then even for funding, do you want to talk about like actually raising funds to be able to do all the manufacturing and to grow and scale this business?
Yeah, it's a huge topic. I think that of all the questions we get asked by other founders, this is probably one of the top areas that they really dig into. And we've had so many learnings. So Three Ships was first started with just $4,000. Connie and I each put 2 grand into the company to get things going. But of course, as you scale, that's not enough. Like you need to bring on external capital, especially if you're launching into large retail accounts. It's just not possible to really float those POs, or even to support growth within a digital channel to grow quickly. So one of our first rounds we failed at horribly. So we went out with the intention of raising $1 million seed round. We had no business raising $1 million at that point. I think our sales in the prior year had been like maybe $150,000 type of idea. And looking back on our pitch deck, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just cringe. It was so bad. No cohesive story, no clear differentiation. The graphics weren't elevated enough. Just so many problems with that deck. But off of it, we ended up pivoting and deciding to just raise a small friends and family round. So it was around 135,000 that we were able to raise instead of the million. But the good thing that came out of that failure were so many learnings that we could take to our next round, which did end up succeeding. Our next round, we raised $1.4 million in just 2 weeks. And it was because of the contacts and connections that we had formed in that first failed round that we were able to raise that next round so quickly in just 2 weeks. So something that I would always recommend that anyone does is, as you meet investors, build out a database that you can then use to give them regular updates. So we were sending out an update email every single month. It was just a list within our Klaviyo, nothing super fancy, basically key areas that we need help, key wins, press mentions, and then new launches and some like high level revenue stats. Doesn't have to be anything too wild, but that kept our brand front of mind for these different investors. So that when we did need to raise our next round, they were already familiar with us. They were familiar with what we had accomplished within the 2 years since we had last spoken with them. And that was huge for us to be able to raise that round really, really quickly. And then another area that I think a lot of founders really struggle with is not knowing where to start of like, how did you even meet these investors initially? Because we didn't have any industry connections. We knew zero investors. The first set of investors that we met was through a conference that we went to where they had this like investor brand meet and greet program that you could register for. So I registered us for it. I think we met maybe 4 investors through that. And then those investors, even though none of them invested, you can ask them after they say no and be like, do you have 2 other people in your network that you think that we should talk to or would be interested in this? And you would be surprised the number of people that investors that have passed on you will introduce you to. And then for those people, we also ask for connections, and it scales out and builds out really quickly. So now we have, I think, like well over 100 different investors that are on that list that we can reach out to and are familiar with us. So it takes time, but focus on building on your connections, ask for contacts, and then also wait until it's the right time for you to raise, which would usually be either like there's been a big movement within the business, like you just landed a big retailer. So like that round that we raised in 2 weeks, that was ahead of target. That was a huge part of why we were able to raise that round so quickly. Or maybe you've hit a critical revenue threshold, like you're over 5 million or 10 million in revenue.
Oh, all those are such good key takeaways, because that's the biggest challenge. I think people think too that they can do it on their own. And sometimes you can, depending obviously how big you want to scale the business. But yeah, how do you get into some of these big retailers, but you have no money to be able to get into
Yeah.
production, or even the cost of advertising, marketing. There's a lot of costs that people don't realize behind the scenes of launching or promoting a product.
Yeah, there really is. And I think especially female founders are so hesitant to bring on external capital, to bring on debt. Debt and external capital play a very important role within growing a business and building out an asset of any kind. Debt is not all bad. And so there is a stat, I think it's only 2% or 3% of female-owned businesses cross $1 million in revenue, which is just wild to me. And around the same amount of venture capital goes towards women. So I think it's no surprise that those two are kind of related. You do need external capital to build a business to be really, really large in most cases, especially if you're wanting to do that really fast. Of course, there's outliers out there, but in general, most brands are having to bring on some sort of external capital through debt or venture at some point within their life cycle.
Oh, so good. Connie, do you have any notes on that as well?
Oh gosh, I feel like there's so many learnings Laura and I had over our past few rounds of fundraising. As she was talking, I was jotting down a few notes of other things that fill in the gaps. So having a good minimum check size and sticking to it is really important. That was a learning that we made after our first round. We had no idea what a minimum check was back then. So when someone asked, we're like, whatever you're willing to give us, which is not a good answer when you're talking to investors. Having a really hard close date also to build FOMO and drum up a lot of interest, but then also making sure that they get on a call with you soon. I think a mistake that we learned in our first round is we just tell investors like, okay, well, when are you free to have a call? And then they'd be like, oh, like in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And then your follow-up call isn't for another 2 weeks after that. So you really have to strike when the iron's hot. So we'd be like, okay, our availability is like in 2 days at 3:30, the round closes next month. Like you got to get on this. And as part of that, also blocking off the time for your raise is really important. So back in our second round, the one that Laura said we closed in 2 weeks, luckily back then we were only a team of, I think 4. So there wasn't too many, there weren't too many team members for us to be managing at that time. So we were able to fully block off our schedules for the raise. So Laura actually like slept over, I'm pretty sure, for that 2-week period. And we would just have calls from like morning until night. My husband, well, fiance at the time, I think, would like cook meals for us. Like it was very, like our whole job was just fundraising. And obviously this changes as you scale, and you know, the timeline of fundraisers extends as you start to raise more money. But the concept of making sure that your focus is fundraising and blocking off the time for it still remains the same. So if you're raising a Series A and you think it's going to take you 6 to 8 months plus, then you should be pre-blocking your calendar the times that you're available for fundraise calls, and don't let other meetings get booked into those times, which is super, super important. And then having a good preview deck, I think, is something that not people invest in. So you are always working in the business. So you see your business from a certain standpoint, but you have to remember that when you're talking to investors that know nothing about your company, they might need like a deeper understanding of your company. And a good way to think about what to put in that deck is honestly working with a really good agency. This was one of the best investments that Laura and I made, was working with a design agency where they just pretty much had like a 2-hour interview with us, and they asked us, okay, tell us everything about your business. Like, what are your strengths? What are the things that you think you do really differently? Tell us the origin story. And then they took all that information along with our financials and they presented it into a deck that told a story. And I think the storytelling is something not enough founders get right when they're fundraising, and they think they just have to get right into the numbers and what they're going to do with the funds that they raise. So have a really good deck. And the last thing on the deck is also, if you're getting the same questions over and over from the investors that you're talking to, then you should modify your deck to include answers to those questions. So what Laura and I did is we had a running document of all the questions we were getting asked. And if we were getting the same one repeatedly, we're like, okay, clearly this is something that we should be addressing in the presentation. And then that way we can prevent them from asking another question. So yeah, Laura and I can go on and on about fundraising. I think it's something that we've learned a lot about.
And I think they don't just invest in the business, they're investing in the people behind the business, because they've got to work with you as well. And they've got to see the vision in order to throw money at it, right? To be able to see it scale and grow.
Yeah. And something that Laura and I always say is like, you're constantly selling as founders, whether you're selling the product or you're selling the vision of your company to investors or your vision to future employees. So that's another great point that you made, Nicole, is when you're getting on a call, even if it's an introductory call with an investor or like a third round follow-up, you're always on, because they're analyzing you, they're seeing what time you join the call, if you're on time or not. Like if you're dismissive, like they're really interviewing you throughout the process.
Absolutely. Now, is there any notes you have to kind of tie up the end of this episode? Is there any takeaways that our listeners could move forward if maybe like there is something that, let's say they do have a product and they're wanting to kind of take that next step? Kind of the mindset, I think, is maybe something we could touch on how to grow and just even your mind in the sense, like I feel like I have imposter syndrome. I'm sure we all go through that time and time again, but is there certain things that you would tell kind of your younger self when you were first looking into fundraising, first getting into retailers, to kind of get you to push forward, to keep going and not give up?
I think it's about having patience. So one of my favorite sayings is aggressive patience. I really believe in it. I think it's from Gary Vee, actually, that first coined that term. But basically what it means is knowing that building anything that's meaningful or starting something new or doing something that's truly game changing is going to take time, and you need to be patient. It's not going to happen in 60 days. It's probably not even going to happen in a couple of years. But even though it will take a long time, you have to be patient, aggressively go after that end goal every single day. I also really believe in the 1% rule, which is that if you just improve a process or the business or yourself by 1% every day, that adds up to a massive change over the long term scale of time. So just know that it's going to take a while. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. We've made a lot of mistakes in the process. Be kind to yourself. No one really has any of this figured out. Like even the people that we talk to that have exited their companies for like hundreds of millions of dollars, they still deal with imposter syndrome. And this is something that our coaches have made very clear, is that they're like, that feeling is never going to go away. The problems that you face are just going to get larger, the larger that the business is. So it's really just about having grace with yourself and giving yourself the space to feel okay about not everything working out according to plan all the time. So that's probably what I would really emphasize to my younger self, is just like be okay with things not going according to plan. Like you will figure things out along the way.
Oh, I love that,
Yeah.
for any age or stage, really.
Yeah.
I
Perfect. And
think,
Connie?
yeah, very similar to Laura's note on imposter syndrome. Something that we did when we were 23 and starting is we were looking at all these big brands that we aspired to be, which I think can be motivating to an extent. And then it can also trigger a lot of imposter syndrome and fear and doubt, because you're like, well, this brand is carried in like this massive retailer. How are we going to get there if we're literally making products in stainless steel mixing bowls? So I think it's really important to think about brands or founders or leaders that inspire you that are also like 2 years out from where you are, 3 years out. Because that can be really motivating too, as opposed to just thinking huge, big picture. And something that Laura and I did when we first started is we were looking at a brand that was carried at Sephora at the time. And we were, lusting over how like large they were, and like we were really trying to get to that point. And then we were able to find their original Etsy page from when they first started their brand. And there was a way that we manipulated the URL so that we were able to see like their first orders. And I don't know if you could still do this on Etsy, but you could actually see images of their very first products that they sold. And when we saw it, it was like brown craft paper, and very granola. And even though our packaging at the time was not the best either, we're like, hey, if they started from here and now they're at Sephora, we can do it too. So like, I guess my advice to my younger self is, yeah, compare yourself to bigger brands, but also think about brands that are just a little bit further in your journey. But then also when you compare yourselves to the large brands, remember how they started too. No one starts as like glamorous as they appear now, unless they're a celeb brand or backed by like a big PE firm. So yeah, like Laura said, give yourself grace.
Yeah, also so good. Like, and that's what I love. That's like one of my favorite questions when closing out an episode is, I think it's just like feel good vibe where no matter what industry you're in, wherever age or stage you're in within your business, that is all such great advice moving forward. So thank you so much. I know you're both so busy, so I appreciate having both of you on today's episode. And we'll definitely, hopefully in another year, we had Laura on last year, we had both of you on this year. Maybe next year we'll touch base and see where 3 Ships at.
That sounds great.
Definitely.
Nice seeing you, Nicole.
You too. Thanks so much,
created
ladies.
we created a discount code for your
Oh,
audience as
yes.
well. Yeah. So they can get 20% off with the code Beauty Brand Podcast, and it's valid until August 31st.
Amazing. So shop, you will not regret it either. Perfect. Thanks so much, ladies. I appreciate your time today.
Our pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.